Good afternoon. It's Angie McLeod here from HIP Strategic Consulting, and I am very glad you could join us. And I'm glad that you're taking advantage of our offer of a presentation, how to strengthen your conversational skills. This particular workshop is based on the work of Judith E. Glaser, as it's summarized in Conversational Intelligence for Coaches. It's a program that I took in 2017, and I have loved it ever since. It's woven into all of the work that I do. Conversational intelligence, though, is one of those things that we don't think about. We don't think about a conversation before we have it. We just jump right in and do it. And yet, if we can take the time to plan things, we can actually have much more effective conversations. So I want to start off by looking at the first slide, which is the fact that 9 out of every 10 conversations fail to have the results that we're looking for. Now, for me as a communicator, that's a really startling statistic. I would like to say that 90% of my conversations, I achieve the outcome I'm looking for. But if we go with Judith Glaser's statistics, only one of the conversations I have in any given day, out of every 10 that I have, actually achieves its goal. Now, with that in mind, what can we do to change those numbers? What is it that we need to be aware of to move from having only 1 out of 10 conversations succeed to having more like 5 or 6 or 7 conversations succeed? And that is about preparing. It's about beginning to understand how conversations work and how other people respond, because we can think about how we're going to respond to particular situations, but we rarely think about how other people are going to respond. And we rarely think about what are their triggers that might set them off. That's what conversational intelligence is about, is being open to being able to understand sort of the emotional pieces that are behind things, the social pieces, and building that into our conversations more effectively. And so let's take a look at what this looks like. I want to move on to slide 2. And slide 2 takes a look at the different levels of conversation that exist. Now, Judith Glaser proposes that there are 3 levels of conversation. The first is to inform people of what's going on. So that's a tell and ask situation. So you might tell somebody this is what needs to happen, or you might ask them to do something. It's very directive. There's not a lot of back and forth within the level 1 conversation, which we call informing people. It's very much of I need you to do. And that's not a bad thing. Level 1 is not a bad thing. It's just that in some situations, that's how we need to react. But there are those conversations. This second level of conversation is when we try to persuade somebody to do something. And that usually looks more like a negotiation. It looks like we're advocating for something. We're making inquiries. We're trying to build consensus, and we're trying to find ways that we can negotiate a compromise that'll work for everybody. But often it's a scenario too where we're trying to convince somebody that our way is the correct way. You'll see this when you're meeting with people who are trying to sell you something. Well, you want to work with my company because ABC. They're trying to persuade you. So that's a level 2 conversation. It's not about really creating a strong relationship. It's about selling you a product or getting you to do something specific. So that's the level 2 conversation. The third level of conversation, which is where I personally like to work, is where we co-create things together. It's a space of exchanging information, exchanging ideas. We are joining together to discover, to explore, to co-create, to share, and to transform. So while I may come into the conversation with one idea and you may come in with another, we're going to come together through discussion to say, what can we do that's going to work for both of us? And so it's a conversation that really gets, for me anyways, it gets my creativity flowing. It allows me to see things from a different perspective. And in addition to all of that, it places me in a space where I'm really getting excited by the energy that we're creating when we work together, the synergy that's created. So I get really motivated, and it's like, yes, let's go, let's go. So the co-creation piece is the level 3 of the conversation. What's important about these conversation levels, and again, every level 1, level 2, and level 3 all have their places, and each of them is good in their own way. However, when we're trying to have really solid conversations in business, the more conversations we can have at a level 3, the better. So the more we're trying to co-create together, it's more collaborative, It's more transformational. It's more about sharing and trusting each other. And so we work in a different space there. So the more you can work in that space, the more effective your conversations will be, and the better your relationships will be with those people that you're talking to. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about how our mind works, because part of conversations, it isn't only about what's happening in your own brain and understanding and managing that. It's also looking at the other person that you're speaking to and beginning to understand what might be happening in their mind. So we have 5 different parts of our brain, and each of them has a certain role. But what's important for us are 3 different brains: the amygdala and the limbic brain. Let's talk about those for a moment. The amygdala is the center, it's at the top of our spine. It's the space or the part of our brain that controls our fight, flight, or freeze responses. It's very ancient. It's caveman days, where you really, this situation's not safe, therefore I need to keep myself safe. So it's the immediate response. I'm going to do this because that'll keep me safe. And that's the amygdala's job. It's to keep us safe. And so it's always looking at every situation we're in and saying, is this space safe? Now, why is that important in a conversation? If somebody doesn't feel safe in the conversation, then they aren't going to actually open up. They're not going to move. They're probably going to work in a level 1 conversation. They're not going to work. They're going to try to control as much as they can in level 1. And they're not going to work into the level 3 conversation where we can start to co-create and really build a relationship. Now, associated with the amygdala is the limbic brain. Now, the limbic brain is where all of our emotional stories are stored. So all of those things that have happened to you, good and bad, throughout your life, are shared or stored, in the limbic brain. And what happens is when the amygdala is aware and alert, and when it's been triggered, it goes to your limbic brain and says, okay, where's an example of a similar type of situation where things have gone wrong? Maybe you're in a networking event, you're chatting with someone, and you're not feeling 100% safe in the conversation for whatever reason. Maybe you're not feeling confident. Maybe today's just a really bad day, or maybe the person's overbearing. It depends on the situation, and that's going to vary lots. But something in there has triggered you to feel unsafe. What's happening then is your amygdala goes to your limbic brain and says, okay, when else has this happened, and what was the result of that? So maybe you were in a situation once where you were talking to somebody and they made you feel small. And so now your amygdala is in the same situation. It's saying, this person that we're chatting with makes me feel small. And what's then happening is your limbic brain is going, last time that happened, the result was this, okay? You walked away crying, or you walked away not achieving the goal that you had for yourself, or whatever that is. So the 2 work together, and the one it recognizes when you're not feeling safe, and the other one pulls up stories that back that up. And because they are sort of our ancient brains, it's all about the immediate response. It's not very logical, it's purely instinct. And that's where those 2 work really, really well. So the next 2 brains I want to talk about are the neocortex and the prefrontal cortex. Now, the neocortex is the space where we begin to sort of make things more logical. We begin to sort things out, and we begin to manipulate and manage things. Okay, so in that space, we begin to look at scenarios and say, wait a minute, maybe that's not true. Maybe in that situation is different than the situation I'm in today. And so it begins to sort things out. And then the prefrontal cortex says, hang on a second, I'm a different person today. And it's the executive brain. It really goes into that logic model of, let's analyze this situation. Let's really figure out what's going on. And even if I'm not feeling safe, what can I do to get myself out of it without having to walk away? So what happens though is in your neocortex and your prefrontal cortex, you start to make sense of that initial trigger or that initial reaction so that you can manage it. Now, if we are truly feeling unsafe though, and if depending on the trigger and the level of the situations and the stories that we're pulling up, we may never get out of our limbic brain and our amygdala. We may be stuck there. And so when you're talking to somebody, you have to watch their reactions. And if you can see that there's something that's just not working well for you, you need to pause, back off, and say, hang on a second, I see that something's not right. And that's your own prefrontal cortex reading the situation, saying, something's not right for the person I'm speaking with. What can I do to make them feel safer? And so you can take a different role. And the more you take that role of taking a step back and watching and listening with your heart and your ears and your eyes and your instinct, the more you're going to be able to read how the other person's feeling and change your approach so that you can have conversations at level 3 and not be stuck in level 1 or level 2. So what also happens is in the amygdala and the limbic brain, there's a lack of trust. And that is really important to be aware of. And then when you move over to the prefrontal cortex, you're starting to develop trust and you're working from a space of trust. And so it's way easier to establish relationships. It's way easier to ask a whole different series of questions. And it's way easier to collaborate and work together on things. So you need to find a way to, with everybody, if you want to be working in that level 3 conversation, to always be looking at things from the perspective of how do I build trust? How do I move other people and myself to that space of working in the prefrontal cortex? Trust is one of those things, you can't force it. So you need to find a way to build it over time through effort, and you need to continually be working towards it. So moving on to the next one. So let's take a look at trust really quickly here. The 5 steps of successful conversations are transparency. So really being clear about what you're trying to do, being clear about how you're feeling at every stage, and making sure that if you're finding a sticky point, you're talking about that sticky point. Some people would call that radical candor. Other people would call it other things. But really, it's about being honest about where you're at, how you're feeling, and where you're going. The second piece of trust is relationship. The relationship is first. So we want to make sure that when we're talking about relationships, we're listening to connect. We want to establish rapport. We want to be open, respectful, and we want to make sure that it's power with versus power over. And I just want to delve into that concept for just a moment. Power over is when you are telling somebody they have to do it. So power over often happens a lot in level 1 conversations. It happens in very directive workplaces where there's a very clear hierarchy of people and the boss tells you what to do and then you go do it. We're seeing less and less of that in our business cultures, but it still does exist in certain situations. And in some places, it's the only thing that can exist, simply because of the structure of the work that people are doing. So I'm thinking emergency services. If somebody tells you you do this, you do it, and there's no questions asked. In my world, power over is something that we avoid completely, simply because power with allows us to have a very collaborative conversation. So power with is about, I walk alongside you and that I'm here to help. We're here in this together. So we're going to work on it together. The results are going to be shared together. It's a team effort. So that's sort of the relationship piece. And the other piece that's really important under relationship is making sure that you're not judging. So withholding judgment. That's a really hard thing to do sometimes. But when we're talking about building a relationship, understanding things from other people's perspective requires that we withhold our judgment. So if you are somebody who naturally jumps into judgment mode, this is a skill you'll need to learn if you really want to build trust. And it's a skill that if you can pull it together, can help you really strengthen your relationships. So the third thing here under trust is understanding. And understanding is beginning to step into other people's shoes, to see their perspectives, to share what you're thinking, but recognize that other people may have different ideas and perspectives and opinions based on their experience and their expertise. And that's all okay. It's again about being non-judgmental, about saying, okay, let me understand, and digging into it until you do understand. And then finding ways to take your ideas and their ideas, which may be very dissimilar, and say, what's similar? What can we build on? How do we bridge the differences between what we're each bringing to the table? Very important. The fourth piece of trust is shared success. Now, in our world, we often want to be right. We want to say, hey, I got it right, yay. If we're sharing our success, it's not I got it right, it's we got it right. And that's another important step, is being able to say, we as a team did this. It doesn't land on one person, but that all of us together were able to achieve this outcome. And that's really important. And when we're in shared success, we can elevate our curiosity. When we know we're working towards a shared outcome, we can ask different questions. We can focus on what's possible. Because it's not about raising one of us, it's about raising all of us up. And you begin to see opportunities that will reduce conflict and allow you to co-create together. And that's very important. And the fifth element of having a successful conversation is testing assumptions and telling the truth. And this links in part back to transparency. And again, it also links to having different ideas and different perspectives, so being non-judgmental. But what it also means is, if I understand you correctly, you're saying A, B, C. So you're testing your gaps, your assumptions, you're identifying where there's a gap between what you've said and what they've said. So you're looking at what are the reality gaps. And you're always asking it with heart. So you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, so if I understand correctly, this is ABC, and I believe that DEF, but there's some similarities in there that we could let's talk about those for a minute. And so when you start to look into those similarities, you then are able to explore and expand a little bit more and find more and more similarities and maybe bridge some of those gaps. And you're doing that from a space of curiosity and solution finding and working together, collaborating. And when you work from those spaces, you're not only testing assumptions and telling the truth, but I'm not comfortable with that is an okay statement in that case. So look at that. So that's how we build trust. So the final piece of this, and I just want to go back to the 3 levels of conversation and wrap up on this particular piece. And that is that if we look at level 1 again, and we add another lens to this. So at level 1, we talked about it being about telling and asking, and those are the 2 things, right? So the interactional dynamics where you're going to tell what's on your mind. And that is very I-centric. It's very much about what I want to communicate. It's not about what you want to hear. It's not about what we want to talk about. It's very much about what I want to communicate. And I do this a lot with my children. I want you to clean the kitchen. And as a parent, that's sometimes what we need to do. So it's not a bad thing. It's just the reality. What happens, though, is that from an impact perspective, it's a transactional influence. I ask you to do A, you do A, we're done. Contract's done. So we influence people by asking them to do things and through information sharing. At the level 2 conversation, we're advocating and inquiring. So we're trying to influence other people to our position. We're trying to sell them something, right? So this is more about, hey, I think you should join me on ABC. The impact of advocating and inquiring at the level 2 is that you're influencing people through personal or positional power. So you're always trying to influence somebody. You're trying to motivate them to come to your opinion or your way of doing things. So it's about persuasion. It's really important to be aware of. The 3rd level, share and discover, is more about releasing energy to co-create. It's about that energy that you create when you begin to collaborate, when you begin to say, hey, tell me about what you're thinking, and I'll tell you about what I'm thinking, and then let's explore where there's similarities, and then let's dive into what's different, because that really has me intrigued. Why are we seeing this from 2 such very different perspectives? And when we're in that share and discover mode, the impact is that we're influencing through energy shifting. And so we create a ball of energy that we share between us, and that energy just keeps growing the more we're able to co-create. And so it's actually quite transformational. It becomes an energy that can really transform your relationship, but it can also transform the work that you do. And that's really important to know. That is a quick look at conversational intelligence and how you can strengthen your relationships and your conversations. I'm hoping you found it helpful. If you have any other questions, please feel free to either pop me an email, reach out to me through Facebook, or through Instagram, whatever that looks like for you. And I'd love to chat. Conversational intelligence is something that I absolutely love, and I love chatting about it. So please do reach out. Have a fantastic day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.